Okay, great. Well, I've changed the, well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation and especially for the opportunity to scramble given the problems yesterday. Since we're packed for time, I won't dwell upon that. I've changed the title of this talk multiple times. Right now, I'm just using the subtitle, Varieties of Public Opinion and What They're Good For. The front part with the intelligence is meant to tie into the conference, and I do think it's there. But I'm going to focus a little bit on these varieties of public opinion and how to measure them, what we can do with them, and how they relate to collective intelligence. So I want to talk about three varieties of public opinion. I think there's a fourth important one that I won't talk about today. But the first one is, I think, what we're most familiar with. I'm calling it ambient public opinion. And that's really just, I say ambient because it's just the environment as we find it without a lot of intervention. And we measure that via aggregated, so it's aggregated individual opinions elicited by standard polls before any policy change under the status quo. Now, there's the concept of latent public opinion that's used in political behavior. And the idea there is it's the public opinion that will result after some policy action has happened, but before the next election. So people have had a chance to live under the policy, and elites have had a chance to promote the policy if they were the ones who passed it, or to contest it and criticize it if they were the ones who were in opposition. And so there's a lot of work in the connection between elite and mass opinion, or elite and mass politics, that what politicians really care about is latent opinion, not what public opinion is in the moment, what public opinion is going to be after they act. But the problem is figuring that out. How do you know ahead of time what the public is going to think about something, especially if they're not particularly attentive? The third variety should be familiar to many of you. I'm going to call it deliberative public opinion. And the idea there is it's aggregated individual opinions like the other two, but we add in the rationales. It's not merely what I want, it's what we should do and why. And I'll gloss this a little bit more, but it's important that those opinions be formed in public and that they be offered as a public. So it's individual opinions, but with a little bit of a twist. We're acting as a we rather than just I. What should we do? I'm answering that as an individual. What should we do versus what do I want? And this is elicited by deliberative techniques, and different scholars and practitioners have different notions of deliberative techniques. I'll be talking a little bit about one that we have pioneered called deliberative town halls, but of course, Alice will be talking about deliberative opinion polls, and there are many others like them. Okay, this is a sort of a complicated slide, but I think it's a pretty important one. There are two major traditions, or at least I want to describe two major traditions in public opinion research. The empiricist tradition, which is the most familiar to empirical scholars. And I really think not to be cute, but the key figure in the empiricist tradition is an American political scientist named V.O. Key. And he famously defined public opinion as, quote, those opinions held by private persons which governments find it prudent to heed. Now that actually goes beyond representative democracy, but we'll focus here on representative democracy. And prudent to heed is important here because it's not particularly normative in the sense of democratic theory normative. It's, will you get rewarded if you heed it, or will you get punished if you don't? So it's prudential, it's instrumental. And Key really developed the idea of latent opinion, and about latent opinion, he said, to know how the public will respond, officials need to estimate the pictures in people's heads and considerations and adjust their strategies accordingly. Now, the other major figure that I want to mention is Jürgen Habermas and the critical tradition, and in particular, his early book, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, and the encyclopedia article called The Public Sphere that came out of it. And in that, he defines public opinion as, quote, the criticism and control a public body of citizens practices vis-a-vis the ruling structure. But he also points out that mere opinions, what we would call ambient, or what I'm calling ambient public opinion, are just a sediment of history. Public opinion, in the strict sense, presupposes a reasoning public. But he laments that today, the process of making things public often serves special interest via publicity, that is, acclamation of non-public opinion rather than reasoning through together. Okay, so why do I mention these two? Well, the real key is connecting the traditions. And in particular, since politicians really care about latent opinion, how can we, it seems to me that reforming representative democracy, one of the key questions, if we're going to retain representative institutions, but I think this even applies to the kind of non-electoral representative democracy that Alain and others have been experimenting with. How and when can we get deliberative opinion to proxy for latent opinion? And here, the innovation we've had is what we call deliberative town halls. Now, deliberative town halls are, we don't want to idealize the old Norman Rockwell town hall. First of all, that's all white men in that picture. And we know that real town halls oftentimes look like the sort of radicalized grandson of the genial fellow on the left there, on the right, holding a gun outside of a Barack Obama town hall. In our deliberative town halls, we convene random samples so that it's not just extremists. It's amazing how powerfully self-selection packs the room. We focus on a single issue to go in depth. We provide background materials so that everybody comes in with a basic level of informed ability to engage. We have neutral moderation, and we prompt citizens to think of themselves as a public and to act in their role as citizens rather than sort of consumers as individuals. And we prompt officials to interact with citizens as they're interacting with the public rather than trying to manipulate or engage in publicity and get acclamation. Now, in order to do that, since this we're talking quite a bit about technology here, I want to tell you a little bit about a very exciting development that we're working on that'll be well, we've already debuted it, but we'll be debuting it with members of Congress in December, and we call it Prytaneum. That's a bit of a fancy word, but the Prytaneum, it was actually a place, a literal place and practice in ancient Athens. Now, everybody knows the agora. The agora was the public market where people sort of spoke. The Prytaneum is where regular citizens, and actually even sometimes non-citizens, could approach officials and petition officials. And unlike deliberative opinion polls, we're interested in what we call vertical deliberation. There are online platforms for horizontal deliberation among and between citizens, whereas what we're trying to do is create connections between citizens or all relevantly affected residents and public officials, and we call that vertical deliberation. And we've built this platform in a bespoke manner and really tried to build deliberative democratic principles into the user interface, and to do so in a way that convenes what Habermas called the reasoning public, that gets presupposed for genuinely public opinion. And really to show officials that that's possible. In talking to the members of Congress we work with, we've come to realize that they'd love to hear, in a lot of cases, what their constituents think in a deliberative mode. But oftentimes they think it's just not possible to figure that out. And we want to show them that it is possible. There's one particular feature of Prytaneum that I want to talk about, and this will be interesting in the context of Danielle Allen's comments later. I haven't seen them, but we are working with computer scientists and artificial intelligence to implement into Prytaneum what we call the pro-social algorithm, which flips traditional social media on their heads, which is why I've got those logos upside down. And I can talk more about it in the Q&A if people are interested, but basically we build in lots of rewards for positive engagement, where positive means according to the principles of deliberative quality, as laid out in deliberative democratic theory. And the most exciting thing that I want to just spend a minute or two on is a feature that we call dynamic intersectionality. And the idea there is if you use random samples, oftentimes you're going to water down subgroups that really have a distinctive voice and perspective on a particular issue. And that creates a problem for justice and pluralism in the democratic context. So let me give you an example. I did a deliberative project for the Veterans Administration in the United States, and it was on balancing medical privacy, the privacy of medical records, and being able to do high quality health services research that could potentially save lives. And what we realized after the fact, analyzing the transcripts, is there was a very particular intersectional identity that had a distinctive narrative. They were less affluent African-American men who had sex with men. And that's a four-way interaction, right? And the reason that was so important is that typically African-Americans run Democrat. They tend towards the liberal spectrum in American politics. However, at least at the time, when it came to the politics of sexuality, that was less true in the African-American community. It was especially less true towards gay or bisexual men. And it was triply less true among less affluent gay and bisexual African-American men. And so it turns out they had a different and more intensive perspective on medical privacy. Well, what the pro-social algorithm that we're working on does is automatically detects the sort of intersectional identities that are generating distinctive points of view, distinctive narratives, distinctive sort of discursive approaches live. And the reason that's so important is because we don't know ahead of time which intersectional identities are going to be relevant to a given issue. This particular one might not be relevant to flat versus progressive taxation, but it really was to this other one. And we can't specify that ahead of time. And so it's really important to be able to do it on the fly. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to say thank you so much for this opportunity. And I hope we'll have time for some questions or maybe colloquy between me and some of the other panelists. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.